This is George Beiruthi from FS Securities giving you the market report. Like every Monday morning, we go through what happened over the last couple of weeks and try to forecast from technical and fundamental analysis what we're likely to see in the next few weeks. So if you enjoy the presentation, by all means give us some feedback. We appreciate that. Well, first of all, let's go through what happened overseas. You can see here on the left hand side the Dow Jones last week was up by nearly 1%, 242 points. However, when you combined the 2 weeks collectively together, you find that the market was almost unchanged. And for the Nasdaq, however, the market was actually better than the Dow, was up by 1.5% over the last 2 weeks. 2/3 of it was actually last week. And when you look at the S&P 500 index, over the last 2 weeks was up 0.3%. So it's actually nice to see 2-week change over 1 week to try to see the trend. Now when you look at the Australian dollar, you can see that the dollar has been climbing slightly over the last 2 weeks. So there has been a trend of 2 weeks of climbing upwards. The US dollar has actually been going down over the last 2 weeks. Most of it 2 weeks ago, and slight change on the downside last week. Now looking at gold over the last 2 weeks was down nearly $10. So that means 2 weeks ago was positive. Last week, the very last week, was down by $17 or 1.1%, eliminating all the profit that we saw in gold 2 weeks ago. Silver down 0.1% over the last 2 weeks. Crude oil, that's the West Texas crude oil, was up 3.6% last week. However, when you combine the last 2 weeks together, it was still down by 2.3%. If you are interested to trade any of the other commodities, from soybeans to wheat, corn, orange juice, all you have to do is call us and we'll try to help you out trading commodities using CFD platform. Now when you look at our Australian market, over the last 2 weeks you can see most of our sectors were down. We've seen a slight change last week, all positive. However, when you combine the last 2 weeks together, with the exception of gold, which was up by 1.4%, and healthcare was up by 3.5%, and telecommunication was up by 0.5%, thanks to what happened last week. We've seen a major climb in communication last week by 3%. All the other sectors were actually down over the last 2 weeks. Our gauge, that is the ASX 200, it's mainly made up by 2 major sectors, the financial and the materials. When both of these sectors are up considerably or down considerably, the market usually reacts accordingly. As you can see here, last week the financials were up 1.03%, the materials was up 1.3%, and the gauge, the ASX 200, was up by 1.4%. And if you combine the 2 weeks together, the financial have seen a major drop of nearly 3.9% over the last 2 weeks collectively, and the materials down 1.6%, and as a consequence, the ASX 200, our gauge for the top 200 markets, was actually 1.6% down. Looking at all the stocks, we can see most stocks were down with the exception of CIMIC, up 3.2% over the last 2 weeks. Newcrest Mines up 0.5%, and telecommunication or Telstra was up 1.7% over the last 2 weeks, thanks to what happened to Telstra last week, 4.4%. Now you can see here, if you were to trade any particular stock, you can see that the banks ANZ 1.2% last week, CBA 1.5% last week, NAB 1.3% last week, Telstra 4.4%, and Westpac 1.2%. So I mean, the banks are still in a good stead over last week, and we would hardly recommend that. And we'll have a look at Telstra as well. Must be some news behind it, and we will actually investigate it. Now, when you look at volume, we believe volume is an important leading indicator. The volume over the last 15 days has been actually coming down. However, you can see here the advances over the declines last Friday, 32.6% advances versus 2.2 to 22.8% declines. Over the last, you can say, 8-9 days, it's actually 4 days advances increasing and 4 days where we've seen the declines exceeding the advances. Now, week on week, we can see that we've had tremendously good 5 weeks of very strong climbing in the market. Then we've seen 2 weeks of major declines, and then last week as a whole, we've seen the advances over the full week exceeding the declines. So that's a good sign. Now, looking at our mechanical system, where we look at the last 5 weeks, and we have a mechanical system which we've designed over 20 years ago, which helps us to find out a strategy for the investor, the conservative trader, aggressive trader, and very aggressive trader. And through that, we actually design a mechanical system using 8 indicators on 2 time frames to actually confirm a particular trend. The American market was bullish 5 weeks ago, started to go bearish, with the exception of the Nasdaq, and you can see that the Nasdaq has got direct correlation with the discussion between the US and China, because the Nasdaq is actually technology index, and of course that really helps by improvement in the trade discussion between China and the US. We've seen the market is bearish for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader. However, the Nasdaq, I would say it's bullish last week and continues to be bullish if you want to trade the Nasdaq. In terms of commodities, gold has actually turned into bearish the last 3 weeks for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader, and so is silver. Crude oil, the same situation, bearish for all type of traders and investors. However, the conservative trader has gone into crude oil neutral. If you're trading wheat and soybeans, obviously that's very positive, again because of the China US trade talk. The Australian dollar gone from bearish over the last 3 weeks, and last week in particular turned very bullish for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader. Now, that is the chart for the Dow Jones. You can see last week was actually green versus red the week before, and we've seen the last 5 trading days it has been more green than red. So, however, the only thing we can notice here that on Friday the market had a much better results and then subsided during the day. So that's not really very strong momentum. So even though we saw the market going up on Friday, it actually wasn't at the very high. So that's not really a very positive indication. But obviously we will maintain that for the Nasdaq in particular, we are bullish. The Dow and the S&P 500 will actually be very careful on the bearish side. Now, for the Australian market, you can see here for our indices, last week most of our indices were bearish with the exception of gold and industrial. So we will not actually go very aggressively on the bullish side on our market this week. Now this is our the ASX 200 chart, the weekly on the left, the daily on the right. You can see we've had a green candle, but it hasn't really gone beyond the half point of the week before, where we had a major decline in the market, and that green candle, unless it exceeds the half way in that red candle the week before, we're not very strongly positive. We've seen some reasonable increase day by day. Out of the 5 days, we've seen mainly green candles. However, we've got that pink line, which is actually the 100-day moving average. And we strongly look at the 100-day moving average in relation to the 50. As you can see here, the 50 is below the 100. That is not very positive. So we will not be very aggressively on the bullish side. Now looking at all the stocks, with the exception of Newcrest Mines, here we can see the last 5 weeks of trading, and last week in particular you can see most of our stocks were actually on the bearish side, with the exception of Transurban and Newcrest Mines. So even though gold was actually on the bearish side, we've seen Newcrest Mines having some advances. So that's probably a pickup from what happened 2 weeks ago when it went from neutral to bearish. Okay, we also look at volume. The volume helps us to determine why certain stocks have actually gone much higher. This particular stock, Sealink Travel, has gone very aggressively in volume, so has been a tremendous increase in the volume from an average weekly volume of 625,000 went to 14 million. So that requires investigation. Ramelius again had slight increase in the volume. We're not going to worry too much about it. And if you're a very aggressive trader, and if you can find some of those stocks trading CFDs, you may want to actually go bearish on OM holdings or hotel properties. That's of course provided they are available to trade on the CFDs. Now, what happened on Friday? US stocks ended more than 1% higher. That's because of the announcement that there is a partial trade deal between the United States and China. You can see the Dow was up 1.2%, 319 points on Friday. But remember on the chart, that actually had much greater increase on that particular day. However, it did not close on its high. So that again, it's a nice increase for the day, but it did not close on the high of the day. So that's actually a warning sign. The S&P 500 was up 1.1%. You can see the Nasdaq up 1.3%. In Europe, the FTSE in London up 0.8%, the DAX 2.9%. Gold was down on Friday, and so is silver. Crude oil was up 2.2%. The Australian dollar trading at 67.9 US cents, 61.5 euro cents, 53.6 British pence, and also 107 New Zealand. And Bitcoin was trading below 8,000 US. So that's actually had a major drop in the last couple of months. When it was more than 10,000 US, it's now below 8. And the Australian dollar conversion, 11,684 Australian dollars. On Friday, it was down nearly $500 Australians. Now we'll come to our contract for difference, the CFD trading. 4 weeks ago, we had 34% rise, increase profit. We were trading the British pound, APN, and ASX 200. And our 4,000 turned into 5,370, 34% increase. However, let's see where that money came from. You can see here, most of the profit came from the ASX 200 trading that, and also from the British pound versus the USD. That was 4 weeks ago. That was actually how we generated the profit. 3 weeks ago, our profit went to 5,818. That is 66.3% rise on our $4,000 injection into the trade. 1 week ago, this time last week, we had 6,453. We were actually up 61.3% profit. $4,000 injection turning into 6,453. And finally, to this morning, unfortunately, we've had a major loss last week, and the 61% is now down to 49%. We've lost nearly $500 last week. But anyway, that's trading, and you can see here where we lost the money. We've gone into the British pound, and you can see the trade here when we buy and close and put the stop loss modified. The stop loss was triggered and we lost some money. And if you want more information, all you have to do is call us and we give you some indication about where the money was invested and where we ended up. Our disclaimer, guys, we don't know your financial circumstances, then everything we say here today is of general advice nature only. It is not personal. So before you take any action, please consult with your professional advisor, or you can talk to us directly. If you wish to talk to us directly, all you have to do is ask questions. You write to me, George at fssecurities.com.au, or you can actually ring me on my mobile. I'm available 14 hours a day on my mobile. That's provided I'm not playing tennis, or I'm playing bridge, or I'm playing backgammon. If you're ringing from overseas, 611 and then 411-259526. If you're ringing from overseas, 61 is the country code. You don't need the 0, and 411-259526. Happy trading and a happy week.